Crossed, it's working. Oh, here we go. Hi, everybody. It's Kristine here, and today I'm with Helen Machen-Pearce. She is in England, and I'm going to ask her a few questions. I wanted to talk to Helen. Helen and I have been friends for a while now. We've never met in person, seems to be the trend. When I see you in person, I'm going to give you a big hug. I'll wear my mask, but I'm going to give you a big hug.
That's good.
So Helen and I have been friends for a while now, and she's been a member of the Subtle Yoga Resilience Society, and she's doing amazing work in England. And I said, "Hey, Helen, I would love to chat with you more about your work and what you're up to. So thank you for being here."
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So first thing I want to ask you to talk about a little bit is your own story, because I know you've been through a lot.
Yeah. As we've talked about before, but I was working for the NHS for 25 years, and I had to leave in 2017. I was a consultant psychiatrist with health challenges, autoimmune illness and chronic health challenges, fatigue and pain. But it helped lead me back to a more concentrated focus on yoga and embodiment. So, it's not all a bad story.
Well, the thing is that oftentimes when we get sick, especially when we're in the wellness and healing field, when we get sick, it's a huge shift in perspective, right?
Oh, definitely. And when I look back, I was stuck with the accelerator on the whole time. I worked for at least the last 10 years in fight, flight, go, go, go constantly, and for far too many hours a week. And I don't think I was really aware of it at the time.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's really typical of a lot of health professionals?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Yeah.
So what happened to you? How did you know you were sick?
I laugh because there was a few things that happened, but I developed pneumonia and didn't notice. So when we talk about interoceptive awareness, I was certainly suppressing mine, and I was on a visit to a prison, and because I worked in secure services, and I felt suddenly so unwell, I had to lie down on the floor in the prison, and I thought, something's not right here.
Was that your first red flag, or did you have other red flags?
Well, in retrospect, I had many other red flags, but I had pushed them to one side. And then I didn't really respond too well to that. I kind of got over the pneumonia, but not fully. And then my body took me out completely at the beginning of 2016. And I didn't really recover from that episode of pain, fatigue. I just hit a brick wall, really.
Did you ever have a real diagnosis?
Well, I had rheumatoid arthritis already. So that was a lead up. And then an additional diagnosis eventually of fibromyalgia, which is a complex diagnosis, and often when nothing else fits.
Like an umbrella, right?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. Chronic stuff, I think, really.
Right. So, and what were your symptoms? Fatigue, you said, pain.
Fatigue, pain, odd moving, shifting symptoms. But the fatigue, which still comes in waves, it can be so overwhelming. And of course, recently I've developed vertigo and tinnitus, which I'm sure are all still related.
Right.
Yeah.
So so a lot of people are using the word dysautonomia now. Is that just sort of another umbrella term?
Yeah, I think it's probably more accurate. But yes, I think the understanding is still growing. Yeah.
So tell us your story. How did you survive?
That's a really good question. I think first of all, I tried repeatedly to go back to work, and then came to the realization that I couldn't do it. Or if I did do a full day's work, that was it for 2 days. So, life had to change. And I began practicing yoga every day. There came a point where I realized I needed to practice every day. And at first, all I was doing was restorative practices because it's all I could do. And I slowly built up, and it was around then I found subtle yoga, actually. And then that was, thank goodness, because this is so much more what I need. This makes so much more sense. So
yeah, that focus on the nervous system, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So will you tell us a little bit about, so you took this work that you did for yourself, and now you're sharing it. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, of course I've done the Revolution teacher training, and I'm a member of the sort of Yoga Resilience Society, and I've also done other embodiment trainings and things, because I couldn't get enough knowledge. I just wanted to learn more and more and immerse myself in it. And it made sense with the science that I knew from my background. I was just paying attention to it. So at the moment, what I've been doing, well, several things. I have a little Facebook group that I do some free live sessions. They're just 30 minutes on a morning. We call it Our Morning Practice. And I have bursts of it, because then suddenly I get too tired and we have to stop for a bit. But people come along to that, or they watch the recording. And then I developed the Yoga Rogue. It's Yoga Rogue is what I use.
I love it.
Going rogue with yoga.
A little bit of a rebel, but a rogue is also a nice word.
Yeah. So I've been doing a series called Embody My Body, and we've had 3 workshops so far, and they're in the Yoga Rogue Academy, and they were available either live or recorded. So the first was self-care and kindness. The second was bravery and strength and finding my inner warrior. The third, which was very recent, was breaking free from shame. And that was at the request of some people. And the one coming up next is boundaries, saying no like you mean it. So looking at these concepts and how we experience them in our bodies. And so the first half of them are very much interactive and working with how people feel, and then very much subtle yoga inspired practice follows. And they've gone really well. I've enjoyed doing them. We have a few members of the sort of Yoga Resilience Society come along.
Oh, good. That's so great. That's so great. So you also told me that you have a program for physicians.
Yeah, I'm developing it. When COVID began, when we went into the first lockdown, this is when I started Zooming, of course, like many people. And I had my class that grew from people I knew, and that grew a fair bit. And I actually felt really, I felt guilty that I was no longer working in the NHS. And
because
so I thought
they needed so much help then, and still probably do, right?
Yeah. And one of my former colleagues invited me to a Facebook group that was for psychiatrists and managing COVID and managing all of the difficulties around that within their working lives. And so I, from that, set up a specific group for psychiatrists in the UK. And we started to Zoom weekly yoga practices focusing on nervous system resilience. And and I did that every week for 6 months. Then I had hit a bit of a brick wall myself.
Right.
Because there are limitations to what I can do, but I've continued. That group has continued, and I still share practices, and it's now open to doctors. There's a separate group for mental health professionals, and I'm developing a program specifically for the medical world to combat nervous system difficulties, stress, burnout. And I've used that group to ask them what they need.
Right.
And that's been really good. It's been really positive. So
So how do you personally keep yourself from not overdoing it? Like, I'm such a pitta person. I could just be like, "I'm just gonna work 24/7. I've got all these things I wanna share," like, and I have to totally have to dial that tendency back, and it sounds like you have that tendency too, so how do you deal with it?
I absolutely do have that tendency, and I recognize it, and even the zoomies, as I call them, say to me, Helen, are you doing too much? And every now and again I have to take pauses.
Right,
It's just the way it is, and if I don't listen, my body will remind me,
right,
and so I do have to then slow down a little.
right,
The
well,
work,
you've been battling with this for 5 years,
yeah,
so have you learned, like, when you see who you were 5 years ago and who you are now, like,
yeah.
what's different for you, and what have how have you changed? I know you've gotten wiser.
I have, and I realized I couldn't be a yoga teacher that was going to have regular classes every week and just carry on. I knew that the way I am means that just couldn't happen. So the focus on workshops has been really positive, and I know that I can plan and prepare and do things leading up to, and plan and prepare a recovery phase.
Right,
I overshot recently. That was a reminder to me. I did a workshop, and a week later, I did a full day retreat, and then followed, this is 2 weeks ago, followed 2 weeks of severe fatigue. Um, so it was a reminder to me that actually a full day is probably too much. I loved it, but it's probably
right,
too much. And the workshop model for me means I can share a lot, but I
right.
can plan and recover. So
Right, right. And I mean, that's just great advice for life too. But also just when I think about teaching yoga and you have that like 1 hour that you're teaching or an hour and a half that you're teaching maybe once or three times a week or whatever, um, that you have to think about that too. Like, how am I planning and preparing for that in terms of my nervous system and my
yeah.
own health? And then how do I recover from it? Do I just like get back up and put my foot back on the gas and keep burning it? Or do I take some time to recover because it takes a lot of energy to teach?
And I think sometimes it takes a while, even for yoga teachers, to realize that.
Yep.
I know of yoga teachers that were doing 15, 20 classes a week, and it's we have to practice what we preach.
Right, right. We do. But then the problem, of course, is this economic one.
Yeah,
Because I know
yeah,
yoga teachers who teach 20 classes a week and they're like, I have to
yeah.
survive. So
But
how
it
do
takes a
you,
toll. It takes a real
yeah,
toll on them.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And how can I mean, it's too much yoga if you're demonstrating too,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
But also, how do you too much asana, I should say. How do you, you know, optimize those classes so that you're bringing in a more reasonable amount of income so that you can survive? Those are really important questions, I think, for yoga teachers.
They are, and they see the need for it as well. And
Mhm.
that's where I was in the NHS. I saw the need for the
Right.
area that I was working in, which was really quite specialized. And I, I really struggled to balance that desperate need with what I could give.
It's like we can't be the yoga teacher for everyone. We have to
No.
accept that.
Yes. Yes. Yeah,
But it
definitely.
does
Yeah.
help so much to specialize, and I love hearing what you're doing with the psychiatric and mental health community, and and just physicians in general. Um, how has your approach to psychiatry changed? I know you're not practicing, but like if you were to go back into practice, given the confines and the constriction of what is allowed in the NHS, would you be doing your practice differently now?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I was always a little bit different.
That's why we love you.
falls in my hair, and I worked with the autism community, neurodivergent population, who many of them were very straight talking, and they told me I looked odd and I didn't look like a psychiatrist. But and I was frequently mistaken for a different professional if we were at meetings, are you the social worker? And I mean no disrespect to social workers, they just didn't think I was the psychiatrist.
Yeah, you look more like a social worker, yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
I know. I think that's a compliment. I think the area I was in, because it was so specialist, we were quite holistic in relative terms to the rest of the mental health around me. But it was growing. I think I'd have a yoga practitioner coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And for the staff, that's what I would like to see.
Yeah.
For the staff to be able to access as well.
Yeah. So we have this in the United States, we have the triple aim that was developed by Mark Bertolucci, I think, of the Institute of Healthcare Improvement. And then it got adopted into the Affordable Care Act. And there were 3 pillars of it, like improving patient experience of care, reducing costs, and then focusing on populations instead of just individuals. And, therapeutic populations. So like diabetes, or just for folks that are watching. And then when there was a critique made of the triple aim, the biggest critique, by far the loudest critique, was taking care of the health of the healthcare professional. That is just not something that's happening. And I can't imagine after COVID, the way that the healthcare system, like the healthcare professionals, must just be on their last legs right now. Like, I can't imagine it. And before you respond, I just want to tell the folks that are watching, if you have a question for Helen, please write it in the chat box and I'll read it to her. Someone just asked, what does NHS mean? That's the National Health System in the UK. It's their word for the healthcare system, which of course is a universal healthcare, which we don't have in the United States. So anything you want to share about what I was just talking about with the physician self-care or clinician self-care?
The system was so driven on results and performance. And I know in the years that I worked for the NHS that it shifted such a lot. And the demand from my perspective, on medics was absolutely enormous. And the drive on waiting list times, and it all came down to the professionals that were involved in delivering. And there wasn't a great deal of support until things went wrong. Whereas I think it needs to be the other way around. I think it needs to be built in first. Right. And that's not a critique of the managers that I worked with, who were very supportive, but they were stuck in the same system.
Right. It's just the dysfunction of the whole system.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The demand was outweighing what was there. There weren't enough bodies to do the work.
Right. And this force to see results rather than to see, they talk here in the United States, they talk volume versus value, right? So just more and more people seeing, because then you bill and that's how you make money, as opposed to are people actually getting better, and that, I'm sure, is a driver as well.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
So the other question that always comes up when you look at nationalized healthcare, universal healthcare versus private pay, is how are folks, how are they taking some responsibility for their own health? And I lived in New Zealand for 6 months earlier this year. So I was living in a universal healthcare system. And one of the things that I saw, I was so happy. I was like, oh my God, healthcare everywhere. And then one of the things I saw was that people don't take as good care of themselves to some extent. There was this osteopath that I would go to for massage and stuff. And he talked about how so many rugby players and mountain bikers would just hurt themselves, and they didn't care because they could go get fixed up. So that question of where is the burden? Like, where does the burden of health lie, externally or internally? And how does yoga help to shift that so that people take some responsibility for their health? Is that something that you would comment on, or
And
have
I
something
think
to
it's
share?
really interesting, and yoga not just helps with responsibility, but actually people realizing that they have a choice and an ability to shift things, because that isn't really, the world of embodiment is all about awareness and choice. And if you haven't got the awareness, you don't make the choice.
Yes.
So it's very much externalized, I think, that, people go to the doctors to be fixed. They don't necessarily start from the position of what has happened and what in my life can I shift in order to make this different. It's the lack of awareness, I think, is a big thing.
Right.
And people that come to yoga or are tuning into slow and mindful yoga and embodiment practices are seeking the awareness and therefore wanting to make their own choices.
Right. Right.
So
That's so,
bringing
it's all
more
about
people in.
agency, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. And that would be a big shift, I think, in this country. Yeah.
Because you have challenges in the UK, like we do here with chronic illness and obesity, et cetera, right?
Yeah, definitely. And a growing number of people with the real chronic challenges like I have. But I see many women, mainly women, seeking yoga from that point of view. I'm part of another group, which is a sisterhood group, and I do some free yoga practices, sometimes live streamed into that group. That was my first experience of live streaming, actually, which was quite, having watched you for so many years live streaming and making it look so easy, and having to step into that was terrifying. But many of those women were coming there looking for ways to help themselves. And so there's a shift happening. There is a shift.
Right. That's exciting to see.
Yeah.
And so with your students, the folks that you're working on, what are some of the things that they're sharing with you? Like how are they transforming? What are the things they're telling you about the work that they're doing with you?
It's in many different ways. I have a friend who practices with me, so she tells me regularly about what's good and what's not so good. And she's great. She's wonderful for feedback, but for a start, she says, my hips hurt and I have not been practicing, something really quite simple and anatomical. I'm quite obsessed with anatomy. I've just noticed I've got a couple of props showing in the background, but I am quite obsessed with anatomy. But she notices the physical benefits first. And actually that has a knock-on effect with everything else she does. So it has a secondary impact on level of anxiety, the way she functions, the way she interacts with others. And of course, people don't always realize that they are managing their nervous system at the same time. It takes them a bit of time to tune into that as well. She also talks about the management of anxiety and how that shifted in the 2 years since she's been practicing. Tuning into her body was actually very difficult for her to start with, because the increase in awareness was a bit scary.
Right. Right. It's like going
Yeah.
into the wilderness for people.
Yes.
Mhm.
But she's found it to be incredibly helpful. And I hear that story again and again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really sweet.
Yeah.
And the other piece is that, and Nancy just wrote this, she said, instant gratification, just give me a pill instead of the effort for self-care, which is really a common attitude, I think, that people have. And so what you're talking about, like the example that you used of your friend, who's also your student, 2 years in, like, how do we get people to buy in to practicing once or 3 times a week or 5 times a week over time? so that they actually start seeing those results. I think it's really hard. I'm not sure what's been your experience.
It is really hard. And I know from my own perspective, again, we've talked about this before, but I ended up attending our pain clinic and being given drug after drug after drug to try and manage things, and got to a point where I was taking so much, and half of the problems that I had were side effects of the medication.
Right.
And halfway through COVID, well, I was already into that. I realized I had to practice every day. I had been for quite some time. And I thought, I need to use my practice and my own regulation of my nervous system to stop all of these drugs. And I
Yep.
did it. 6 months.
Yay.
I did it. Yeah. So it's very hard to take others by the hand on that journey, but
Yep.
we can be with them so that they can begin to tune in and begin to realize, begin to notice, and then make that decision themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
And
It goes back to awareness.
Well, and sometimes people really have to hit the bottom. Not everybody,
Yeah.
but a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I agree.
The other thing I was just thinking about when you were talking about this idea of like regulating your nervous system so that you can minimize the amounts of pharmaceuticals that you're taking, right? Because most pharmaceuticals are some kind of autonomic regulators, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing something with your nervous system, right?
Yes.
And they only work because you have all that endogenous possibility within you. Like they work because the receptors are there
Yes.
already. So
Yes.
like, how do you access them endogenously? I mean, that's always been a big question for me.
Slowly.
Huh?
Slowly. Over time. It just
Right.
takes time. It takes practice.
Right.
And I know, and I was reminded again this last 2 weeks when I've had this fatigue slump, that sometimes I don't want to practice. And when I do, I feel better.
Yes. I
And
feel like it's like Ulysses, and the sirens. Like you
yeah,
got to tie yourself to the mast or the
yes,
sirens will just call you away. There's so many and other things. There's tons of YouTube videos to watch and there's all these other
yeah.
things you can do. But you got to tie yourself to the damn mast and do your practice,
And actually, this is one of the reasons that for the society, people wanted to know where there was a gentle practice or where there was a stronger practice so that they can work out what they were capable of some days. It's actually been really helpful for me to be going through reviewing them, because when I review them, I have to take copious notes. And so I'm like, oh, yes, I'd forgotten about that one. Reorganize my library and know what I can go back to and
Right.
when.
Right, right. It's so important to know that. And the other thing that I feel like that I've done with myself and I talk about a lot with my students is just trick yourself into practicing. So you just give yourself a super low bar, just
Yes.
one pose. That's all you have to do. And of course, the way we do poses, we repeat them. So like 5 or 8 times or whatever. But you do that one pose and then then you're done. That's your practice. Except you may have tricked yourself into wanting to do another pose.
I also will practice anywhere. So at first I was like, oh, I have my yoga shed, as you know, and some days I just didn't have the energy to go to the yoga shed and to turn on the heater and the electricity. And so, no, I just roll out my mat wherever I am and I practice in whatever I'm wearing. You don't need to have special clothes as long as it's comfortable. So making it as straightforward as possible just to do that.
Another trick I do is I have yoga mats kind of around my house in different places. I'm like, there's a mat. I can go lie down on that. And I was talking to my friend who's a physical therapist who has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Her name's Libby Hinesley, and she does great yoga. And she's online too, doing great yoga anatomy work. And she said to me the other day, she was like, my practice is mostly just lying down right now because that's what I need to do, and So when you start lying down and you do like some bilateral stimulation or contralateral movements, it can start just a little squirt of norepinephrine go there.
Yes.
Get
Yeah.
to start moving a little bit more. Like I like to remind folks that it doesn't have to be 108 sun salutations. You just do something.
Yeah. I had a big slump a year ago. It was one of my fatigue things, and then I did a workshop at the end of that, which I still go back to myself, and I called it Finding Me Again, and it was all based on, it was all very low to the floor. I think we stood up a little bit,
Yep.
just for a little bit of strength, but it was all slow and gentle and restorative, and just I was coaxing myself back in, actually.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
It's so wonderful when you start. And I remember listening to Amy Weintraub, who wrote the classic book, Yoga for Depression. And she said, I just had this mat next to me when she was depressed. She just had a mat next to her bed. She'd like roll out of bed and onto the mat, there it
Yeah.
is. So it is
Yeah.
like all those little cues for our memory are so helpful, I think, to
Yeah.
make the habit. And then once you have the habit, it's hard to break the habit because your body doesn't feel right without the practice.
I so agree. And I was just thinking that when you said having a mat by the bed, and I know at times I have resorted to meditation
Yeah.
instead of meditation. And
I love it.
when I, and I know that we should sit up tall, but if it's no meditation or lying down, then okay. Just
Right.
this once, I would be lying down. I do mantras when I can't sleep,
Yep.
so start with it where you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really good information. I want to read you a couple of comments. And hey, if you're watching and you have a question for Helen, please go ahead and put it in the chat box. So let's see. Mauro. Hi, Mauro. Nice to see you here. He's from Brazil. He said 20 classes in a week. That must be exhausting. Yes, it is. I don't recommend teaching that many. Let's see. Nancy wrote, so when you start practicing faithfully, when do you know to start decreasing the medication, the drugs? That's a really good question.
That is a really good question, and I would strongly recommend anybody looking at that to sit and talk to their doctor about it first, and because some drugs need to be very carefully managed as you
Like
decrease
the
them.
benzodiazepines, right?
Yeah, and even the opiates as well. You can make
Of course.
yourself quite unwell by too rapidly doing it and taking down more than one drug at the same time. It has to be very carefully managed. I did it over 6 months, but I did have a medical degree behind me, which helped me
Right.
understand what I was doing. So I think the biggest thing is involving your medical team so that they can
Right.
guide you. I spoke to my pain consultant recently who's discharged me because he was so overjoyed that I'd stopped everything that he'd prescribed. I said, it's all down to yoga.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, you're so on the beginning of the bell curve in terms of healthcare professionals. I mean, I really think this stuff is going to explode in the
Yeah.
healthcare world over the next few years. I could be wrong, but just because we know how effective it is.
I think so, and I hope so. I think there's a reluctance at the moment, and it's partly due to the busyness. So, the healthcare professionals are so focused on what they're doing, it's really hard for them to bring something else in. And also their awareness. Some of them don't actually have any yoga awareness, despite
Right.
what seems to be out there.
Right, right.
Um,
Well, what I've found in working with physicians specifically is that they always want to put yoga in the exercise box, not in the nervous system regulating box. I mean, the exercise box and the nervous system regulating box have a little
yeah,
bit of then,
yeah,
they overlap a bit. But I found that a lot, they just want to keep shoving it into the exercise box. And I'm like, no, we're trying to regulate the nervous system. It's different.
yeah. Yeah, I know when I had this over COVID, the weekly group that came, and their understanding shifted. And you know, I sneaked in meditation and pranayama into there as well, and I would add them into the group, and they were very receptive and responsive to that. So I'm hoping it will grow.
Yeah, yeah. I
Um,
think we need more good research, and that's happening, but I
yeah,
think that's just like the key thing to help people go, "Oh yeah, here's the evidence base. I'm going to recommend this," you know. And do you have any advice for folks who are yoga teachers out there who want to connect with physicians, like how about talking to them about studies, anything you would recommend?
the Connect healthcare kit. That's a
Yeah,
good one.
thank you. Well, that's right. I have a product.
Yeah, you do. And as you know, I used it. I was about to start working with a GP practice when COVID hit,
Right.
and I haven't actually gone back into in person yet, just because of my own immunity. But that was helpful. That was really helpful.
Oh, good.
And I think the point was approaching with some evidence as well. So
Mhm.
not just saying, you know, I'm here, I can offer yoga. They need to know why.
Yeah.
And so the kit actually does have a series of references in it, which I found really helpful,
Oh, good.
sharing that kind of information.
Thank you for mentioning that. Well, we should probably wrap up for today. It's been so nice chatting with you. Archana said, I agree with the healthcare comment. I have started to approach doctors and they're starting to listen now. Woohoo.
Yeah.
Archana, the kit is called Connect with Healthcare and it's on my website, subtleyoga.com. I want to thank you so much, Helen, for being here. It's always lovely to talk to you. And for those of you who are watching now or watching the replay, please leave a comment. It just helps more people get to see this video, and we really appreciate it as well. So thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time and the great work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.